"Mon Dieu," said the woman, crossing herself, if Grimid was slow in speaking, we know that he was quick to act. He sprang to the door and shook it violently, but it was bolted on the other side. "Open the door," cried the host. "Open it instantly." "Sir Monk." No reply. "Unfasten it, or I will break it in," said Grimid. The same silence, and then, ere the host could oppose his design, Grimid seized a pair of pincers he perceived in a corner and forced the bolt. The room was inundated with blood, dripping from the mattresses upon which lay the wounded man. Speechless, the monk had disappeared. "The monk!" cried the host. "Where is the monk?" Grimid sprang toward an open window which looked into the courtyard. "He has escaped by this means," exclaimed he. "Do you think so?" said the host. "Bewildered boy, see if the mule belonging to the monk is still in the stable." "There is no mule," cried he to whom this question was addressed. The host clasped his hands and looked around him suspiciously, whilst Grimid knit his brows and approached the wounded man, whose worn, hard features awoke in his mind such awful recollections of the past. "There can be no longer any doubt but that it is himself," said he. "Does he still live?" inquired the innkeeper. Making no reply, Grimid opened the poor man's jacket to feel if the heart beat, whilst the host approached in his turn, but in a moment they both fell back, the host uttering a cry of horror, and Grimid becoming pallid. The blade of a dagger was buried up to the hilt in the left side of the executioner. "Run, run for help," cried Grimid, "and I will remain beside him here." The host quitted the room in agitation, and as for his wife, she had fled at the sound of her husband's cries. Chapter XXXII. The Absolution. This is what had taken place. We have seen that it was not of his own free will, but, on the contrary, very reluctantly, that the monk attended the wounded man who had been recommended to him in so strange a manner. Perhaps he would have sought to escape by flight had he seen any possibility of doing so. He was restrained by the threats of the two gentlemen and by the presence of their attendants, who doubtless had received their instructions; and besides, he considered it most expedient, without exhibiting too much ill will, to follow to the end his role as confessor. The monk entered the chamber and approached the bed of the wounded man. The executioner searched his face with the quick glance peculiar to those who are about to die and have no time to lose. He made a movement of surprise and said, "Father, you are very young." "Men who bear my robe have no age," replied the monk, dryly. "Alas, speak to me more gently. Father, in my last moments I need a friend." "Do you suffer much?" asked the monk. "Yes, but in my soul much more than in my body." "We will save your soul," said the young man. "But are you really the executioner of Bethune, as these people say?" "That is to say," eagerly replied the wounded man, who doubtless feared that the name of executioner would take from him the last help that he could claim, "that is to say, I was, but am no longer. It is 15 years since I gave up the office. I still assist at executions, but no longer strike the blow myself. No, indeed." "You have, then, a repugnance to your profession. So long as I struck, in the name of the law and of justice, my profession allowed me to sleep quietly, sheltered as I was by justice and law. But since that terrible night when I became an instrument of private vengeance, and when with personal hatred I raised the sword over one of God's creatures, since that day—" The executioner paused and shook his head with an expression of despair. "Tell me about it," said the monk, who, sitting on the foot of the bed, began to be interested in a story so strangely introduced. "Ah!" cried the dying man, with all the effusiveness of a grief declared after long suppression. "Ah! I have sought to stifle remorse by 20 years of good deeds. I have assuaged the natural ferocity of those who shed blood. On every occasion I have exposed my life to save those who were in danger. and I have preserved lives in exchange for that I took away. That is not all the money gained in the exercise of my profession I have distributed to the poor. I have been assiduous in attending church, and those who formerly fled from me have become accustomed to seeing me. All have forgiven me. Some have even loved me, but I think that God has not pardoned me. For the memory of that execution pursues me constantly, and every night I see that woman's ghost rising before me. A woman! You have assassinated a woman! Then, cried the monk. You also, exclaimed the executioner. You use that word which sounds ever in my ears, assassinated. I have assassinated, then, and not executed. I am an assassin, then, and not an officer of justice. And he closed his eyes with a groan. The monk doubtless feared that he would die without saying more, for he exclaimed eagerly, Go on. I know nothing. As yet, God and I will judge. Oh, Father, continued the executioner, without opening his eyes, as if he feared on opening them to see some frightful object. It is especially when night comes on, and when I have to cross a river, that this terror which I have been unable to conquer comes upon me. It then seems as if my hand grew heavy, as if the cutlass was still in its grasp, as if the water had the color of blood, and all the voices of nature, the whispering of the trees, the murmur of the wind, the lapping of the wave united in a voice tearful, despairing, terrible, crying to me, Place for the justice of God.